Alleged victim 2 in this case is now facing questioning from the defense after testifying that she performed sex acts with men for Sean Combs' pleasure, including after she claimed she threw up, after she claimed she was exhausted, after she claimed she repeatedly expressed her reluctance to continuing these hotel nights. She testified that she was subject to Combs' physical violence. After all of this, now she is facing questioning from defense attorney Tenny Garagos. And remember why her testimony is so important, right? It's important for several reasons. For sex trafficking, she claims that she had sexual relations with men in all different locations, who these men were being paid. And if the prosecution can show that she was coerced or forced into these commercial sex acts, that's the key. The prostitution charge, her testimony that she was transported to different locations for these hotel nights, that the men were paid through Combs, that their travel to these places was paid and arranged through Combs. That's a more linear way to get to transportation to engage in prostitution. Racketeering conspiracy, the top charge, right? We're talking about an alleged criminal enterprise, criminal association. Well, her testimony arguably supports that by saying that assistants, right, Sean Combs' inner circle set up these nights, that she was a victim of coerced sexual activity. Sex trafficking is an underlying predicate crime of RICO. And generally, the more the prosecution can show a pattern of abuse of women as they outline in their indictment, that helps with the RICO charge. So, what does cross-examination look like? What did the defense try to get at? So for that, let me bring on Long Crimes in-court reporter Elizabeth Milner, who was there for every second of this testimony. And the most important thing, first of all, happy birthday, Elizabeth. It's Elizabeth's birthday. She had to work on her birthday, but worked on such a big case. She was in the courtroom. Elizabeth, happy birthday. Hope you're having an okay birthday so far. I know it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, but that's okay. I'd rather spend it with you guys.
Well, that's very kind. And she was getting a lot of love during our lunchtime show today. Everybody was wishing Elizabeth happy birthday. You can check those out up on YouTube as well. Okay, so before we even get into Jane, Elizabeth, a lot of questions that we had, particularly on the lunchtime show, was about what's the status of the defense's mistrial motion. Remember, they basically said that witnesses had perjured themselves on the stand. This was entirely prejudicial. The case should be thrown out right now. And also, there was a conversation about whether Dr. Dawn Hughes, this forensic psychologist who testified about the complicated dynamics and relationship between abusers and victims, whether she will be recalled to the stand. She testified earlier for the prosecution. Does she have to be recalled? Those two issues, real quick, can you give us updates on the mistrial motion and Dr. Dawn Hughes?
Well, after spending an entire day of court, you can kind of possibly guess that the judge did deny that motion for a mistrial, and there was a lot of reasoning behind it. So the defense, as far as the motion being denied, the judge was saying that no interference happened and that the defense was able to undermine the alleged incident, and that being Bonna being allegedly dangled off of the 17-story balcony over at Cassie's condo. And the judge was saying, well, you guys were able to undermine this alleged incident by showing the hotel receipt. And so he said that this isn't fodder for a mistrial and that the defense can use these exhibits to undermine both Bonna's testimony as well as Cassie's testimony. And so they kind of had more discussions about it. And the defense was like, well, we didn't know what Bonna was going to say while she was on the stand, because a lot of their motion for the mistrial really had to do with Bonna's testimony and how they believed that she had perjured herself after getting an immunity deal to testify for the prosecution. But they being the defense was kind of like, okay, well, the government didn't offer any response to this particular hotel receipt. But then the judge was kind of like, well, Nicole Westmoreland really did have her Perry Mason moment under the cross-examination, and that's not grounds for a mistrial, because they were kind of able to really kind of poke holes into the story that Bonna was testifying to, as opposed to that Trump hotel receipt, which showed that Diddy wasn't even on the West Coast when this alleged incident particularly happened. And then the defense was like, well, Cassie said that she saw this incident happen, but then in the text message she's saying that she saw or she heard about this incident because she was told about this incident after the fact. And so the defense says that they wanted to submit a certain instruction to the jury so that way the jurors know that Bonna's testimony was allegedly perjured. But the government was like, well, Bonna's testimony wasn't perjured. She might have been confused. The metadata could have been wrong, because when they were still showing exhibits at this point, you could see the metadata of when Bonna took or was sent photos of her injuries after this alleged incident happened. Those injuries were taken or at least sent to her on September 26th. But on that same day, Diddy was, there's a hotel receipt showing that Diddy was actually here in New York, not in California around this time. But the judge said, well, maybe there's this innocent explanation that this happened 9 years ago. Bonner testified that she was in her early 20s at this point, addicted to drugs, and that this photo could have been taken earlier, it could have been taken later, and that the defense did enough on the cross-examination to really attack the timing of when this alleged incident happened. But the defense was like, well, the government still isn't bringing up this hotel receipt, and Bonner had motivation to lie while on the witness stand because of her civil suit against Sean Combs. And then the judge was like, okay, well, you can submit a proposed instruction for the jury to listen to. And then the defense was like, okay. But as far as the motion to recall Dr. Don Hughes to testify, that motion was denied. And so it was interesting because during the cross-examination of Dr. Don Hughes, who was a government witness, she was kind of a blind witness to this case, Jonathan Bach, who was retained kind of last minute for Diddy's defense team, that was the only time we actually saw him inside the court doing the cross-examination when Dr. Don Hughes testified. But we did see him today, and I think we might have seen him today, especially this morning, just in the case that the judge didn't deny this motion, and so that Jonathan Bach could possibly argue it, but we didn't see him after the lunch break. But essentially, the judge was like, okay, well, Dr. Hughes testified about romantic relationships, not employee relationships when it comes to Mia, and specifically Mia still sending text messages to Diddy even after she was kind of terminated from her employment, but also after the allegations that she said that she had against Diddy, where she was saying that Diddy allegedly sexually assaulted and sexually abused her. And so the judge was kind of like, okay, well, that was the government's job to really ask those questions as far as the employee relationships and why people may text their employer after the fact. And so it seemed like the judge gave a win to both sides this morning, either the motion for the mistrial or even the motion to recall Dr. Don Hughes. And so that was kind of what had all happened this morning before the jury entered and before the witness came back on the stand.
That's so specific, right? So you can't just make, I guess the judge is saying, you can't just make a general analysis that any victim-abuser relationship, there has to be, if it, she testified about a romantic relationship and the dynamics of a romantic relationship as opposed to anybody else who might be abused. Yeah, it sounds like the prosecution should have thought of that, and that could be a problem. That could be a problem. Although you also wonder, the jury might just listen to Dr. Don Hughes and use that analysis to explain away some of the behavior of any of the witnesses who've testified. I don't know. Don't want to get down that hole. I do want to talk about Jane. And it seemed the beginning of her cross-examination by Tenny Garagos was about the circumstances that brought her to even be a witness in this trial, right?
Well, right off the bat, Tenny Garagos, very friendly, I felt like, with Jane while she was on the witness stand. You would think that the two were kind of old friends catching up. Obviously, we know that's not the case, but Tenny came out very nice. She wasn't kind of like aggressive necessarily. It wasn't kind of like the Brian Steele moment of the cross-examination of Mia, or even the Nicole Westmoreland cross-examination of Bonner, or even Don Richard. But right off the bat, the defense was acknowledging that they had met with Jane specifically just a few times before she later became a government witness, and that they were really kind of putting an emphasis that even though Diddy is currently paying her rent and Diddy is currently paying for the lawyer that she has representing her, that Diddy didn't even interfere even though he's paying for her attorney. And that Jane was explaining once again to the jurors that she hasn't spoken to Diddy for 8 months prior to taking the stand or even seen him, because obviously he's been incarcerated since the last time she saw him, but last time she saw him in person was August of 2024. He was arrested the following month, and she says she hasn't seen him since August of last year. And so the defense was asking Jane about her preparation for the cross-examination, and that happened over 2 or so meetings with the government. Jane said that she wasn't the one who went to Homeland Security, that it was the federal prosecutors who had called her, and that she didn't want anything to do with HSI. We learned yesterday while she was on the witness stand, still under direct, that HSI on the day of the raids to Diddy's Miami property as well as his Los Angeles home, that HSI actually left a card on Jane's door too. And so then the defense is kind of like, okay, well, you had done a night with an escort even after knowing that he was under investigation. And Jane says yes, and that Jane was given immunity to be a grand jury or given immunity at the grand jury hearing. And then the defense is like, okay, well, you chose to participate. And Jane is like, well, it was because of my relationship with him and the lifestyle that he introduced me to. Well, you didn't break up with him. This is Tenny Garagos. And then Jane is like, well, of course not. And that they were really kind of talking about whether or not Jane has regret versus resentment versus regret. And that Jane was explaining that she didn't have regret, just a little bit resentment. And so I think for the jurors kind of listening to this, because I even said this yesterday, Jesse, you can feel sometimes while she's testifying that she still has feelings for Sean Combs, but then I think there are also other aspects where she's still kind of processing, and this is something that she testified to, just processing everything that went on throughout the duration of their relationship.
Elizabeth, would I be crazy to say that what I think the defense is doing is not necessarily, and we'll get into this, not necessarily attacking her credibility, that these things happen the same way they were attacking the credibility of, let's say, a Mia or a Brianna Bengolan, trying to say you were never sexually assaulted or you were never dangled off the balcony. But it seems what they're trying to say, and I could be wrong, you're testifying to something, and it's the government who's forcing you to testify. It's the government who's transforming your testimony about what could be a toxic relationship into this racketeering case, into this sex trafficking case. It's not like they're distancing themselves from these episodes occurring. It's not as if they're saying these episodes with other men didn't happen. But to me, it seems what they're saying, they're not even attacking her so much as trying to say, you didn't want to be a part of this. It's the government who's forcing you here. It's the government who's transforming your testimony into this federal charge when it's not. Real quick, do you think I'm totally off with that based on the questioning today? And we'll get more specific about it.
Yeah, not at all. I felt that way kind of at times too, where it was kind of like, okay, do you feel like that, honestly, count 4 really applies to you, or is the government telling you that count 4 really applies to you? Because there were times, Jesse, to be quite honest with you, that I was like, okay, well, it seems that she was totally fine doing these hotel nights as long as she was also getting the love and adoration and affection from her partner, from her lover, from Sean Combs, pretty much. And so I wonder when the jury goes back to eventually deliberate on this case, will they kind of have the same feelings that I think a lot of us were having, where they were kind of like, okay, do you feel that you are a sex trafficking victim, or is this something the government is telling that you are? And so it could go kind of either way. We'll see.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And I understand, the cross really focused on, and not surprising here, a lot about the love in the relationship and how she wanted to cuddle next to him and she wanted to be with him and, essentially do all these things. And even voice notes were played to show the loving relationship, right? Talk to us about that, because it might be difficult for a jury to reconcile that he is a sex trafficker and she's a victim based on our common understanding or general understanding of what those roles might be, versus the love in this relationship, right? Didn't they focus upon that at the beginning of her cross, the love and the voice notes? What happened there?
Yeah, well, Jane was explaining that there was a lot of kind of blurred lines in terms of her emotions, and that she just wanted to fulfill her duties as a partner to Sean Combs. And so the defense was really kind of talking, to your point, Jesse, just about the love that Jane had for Sean Combs, aka Diddy, and just why she kept staying throughout the 3 or so years of their relationship, and that she kept on even doing these hotel nights, especially even during the later years where she was kind of expressing that she didn't want to be doing them anymore, and this was all that she was worth. But as far as even that, when they were recalling that Jane would, put on Diddy's favorite show, which so happens to be Dateline. Unfortunately, I was waiting to hear that it might have been Sidebar presented by Jesse Weber, but unfortunately it was Dateline. And that Diddy was smiling as Jane was talking about doing foot rubs on him. And I thought it was an interesting kind of moment where he just kind of, took the mask off a little bit and was smiling just about that particular part of the testimony. But then, we started kind of getting into the exhibits as far as the voice notes goes, because this is a very, was a very current relationship. So there was a lot of text shown and there was a lot of voice notes shown, because that's what a lot of people do nowadays, as opposed to texting or calling. They send voice notes to one another. And so they kind of took us back a little bit to their Turks and Caicos trip when they two first kind of got together. And so we heard an exhibit, and it's a voice note from Diddy to Jane, where Diddy is saying, "Hey baby, we had a great time. You are the crack pipe." And the crack pipe was kind of in reference to, I guess, their lovemaking essentially. And that Diddy was saying, okay, stay in the light. It was so much effing fun. Get in your bag. And the get in your bag comment, according to Jane, was kind of acknowledging that love contract where they had like a gentleman's agreement for him to pretty much pay for her rent. And so then we hear a voice note from Jane to Diddy where she's like, I love being up under you. Stay in the light. We'll have a big celebration for you. A whole new level was unlocked. I've been closer to you. I'm so happy. I hope you have an amazing day today. Health is wealth. I love you so, so, so much. Moi. Yay to your contract. And that contract that she was referring to was the love contract. And so it seemed like we were kind of hearing a lot of other voice notes where Jane was kind of expressing her love to Diddy, and Diddy was kind of expressing his love back to her, as opposed to yesterday under the direct, where really the prosecution was kind of showing the more kind of aggressive voice notes where Diddy was telling her to get out of her feelings and that he's single, all of that stuff. But as far as today goes, the defense really kind of was like, okay, well, there was love there.
Yeah.
You two were expressing love with one another, and you seemed comfortable expressing your love with your partner at the time.
I think yesterday it seemed what they were trying to say is, oh, this is examples of Sean Combs being manipulative, coercive, deceptive, these subtle elements for sex trafficking. Is it a stretch? I don't know. I will tell you, a big focus has been made about what he's been paying her, right? Getting her gifts, giving her cash, and paying her rent. Particularly since we learned yesterday that he's apparently still paying her rent. Where it becomes the sex trafficking component is, was he dangling it over her head, right? Financial control. I'm controlling you. You have to do what I want. There was a back and forth today about whether, in fact, he was actually threatening to withhold rent, right? And if he was, that could help the prosecution's case to say, oh, he's using that to get what he wants. Was that clarified today?
So yeah, at first, the defense was really kind of talking about the positives of the relationship with Diddy, and that Diddy gave Jane confidence, that he showed her a different perspective and introduced her to gospel, and they would put gospel sermons on television. They would send gospel sermons to one another, and that I felt like the defense was kind of trying to point out just that Diddy's kind of more gospel side as opposed to the other stuff that we're listening to in court. And then they kind of got into the businesses that Jane had for herself, where Jane was explaining that she has a swimwear line, she has a dress line, she has other businesses, but that Diddy also invested in her businesses. $20,000 he put into her dress line on top of the other funds that he was paying for her, including her rent later on, including just other aspects, and on top of that, gifts that she was getting. And so Jane was explaining that she has kind of this minimal style dress line, and Tinny Garagos was like, so you went from content creation to apparel, and Jane was like, well, the apparel needed a lot out of me, and I was doing a lot with Sean Combs around this time. Tinny Garagos is like, well, how much did you make from your influencer creation? And Jane was like, well, if I book 2 brands, that would be $50,000, which in influencer terms, maybe it's not a lot of money. To me, it's an extremely amount of money just to kind of post content for 2 different brands, and whether that be photos or videos or that type of stuff. It seemed like the defense was kind of like, okay, well, you can make $50,000 in this particular instance. And according to your testimony where you're saying Diddy's paying, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, the defense didn't really get into it, but I'm thinking in terms of if she's getting $10,000 for her rent alone, this $50,000 from a brand deal would pretty much pay 5 months of rent. And so then Tinny Garagos is like, well, you're also getting child support, right? And Jane was like, yeah, $5,700. And it seemed like, yeah, this defense was definitely pointing out she's making other income as far as brand deals, as far as child support goes, that she really didn't need the financial payments that she was getting from Sean Combs. And then they kind of got into her OnlyFans page where Jane was saying that Diddy didn't want her to be a part of something that was frowned upon because of the stigma that comes with OnlyFans. And Jane was saying that she joined the website because she needed the money. She needed it financially. During her direct testimony, she was explaining that she maxed out a few credit cards because she went into so much debt. And I think the defense was kind of like, okay, but you're making all of this money. Are you spending it frivolously? Are you living within your means? And then Jane, after saying that she joined the website because she needed the money financially, the defense kind kind of pointed out that Diddy was proud that she joined OnlyFans and that she was proud that she was making her own money because OnlyFans was a pretty lucrative business, and still to some influencers or creators on that app still is a lucrative business. And so Tenny Garagos is like, well, you didn't need his permission or approval, and Jane was explaining that she wanted his approval. And I think that kind of makes a difference a little bit sometimes too, Jesse, between the difference of Cassie's testimony versus Jane's testimony, where Jane kind of, while she's on the stand, seems like she really just wanted Diddy's approval over just every aspect of her life, whereas under Cassie's testimony, it seemed like the approval that she had to get kind of put her kind of in a stranglehold, in a sense, where she felt like she had to get or she felt like Combs wouldn't do anything without the approval, whereas Jane was like, well, I need his approval to do these things. And the defense is kind of like, well, did you need the approval? But I think the defense kind of did a good job here, really kind of being like, okay, there's a lot of money just kind of floating around from all these other deals and lines and apparel that you have, but you needed this money from Combs because...
Yeah, it's all about control. It's all about control. The more that the prosecution can establish that he was controlling their financial livelihood, their appearance, whether or not they were seeing other people, that goes to the idea of fraud or coercion, maybe even force for sex trafficking. And it's kind of a gray area now. And speaking of that, because the defense has been very keen to characterize these relationships not as one of a sex trafficker and victim, but these are toxic relationships built on love and jealousy and anger. And you put aside the idea of freak-offs and hotel nights, which everybody might not be familiar with or engage in anything like that, that these are common elements, and maybe even violent elements that are unfortunate, but common elements we see in relationships. And the jealousy aspect of it came up a lot, right? The jealousy that she might have been upset or reluctant to engage in these hotel nights, not because she was a victim of sex trafficking, but wasn't it that, I don't want to be a part of this if you're seeing somebody else on the side, or I'm not being treated like other girls on this, other girls, right? I mean, didn't that come out? Jealousy was a big factor in the cross-examination?
Yeah, it took up a pretty good chunk of the cross-exam this morning. And so while Jane was testifying under direct, she did testify that Diddy kind of explained that the two had an open relationship and that she was fine initially with him seeing other women. But then Jane, while under cross-examination, was saying that Diddy described himself as polyamorous, and that she said at first it was something that I didn't mind, but then as feelings grew pretty deeper, that she said it was hard for me, the imbalance of just the treatment. And so Jane was saying that she didn't say the nicest things about the other women that Diddy was seeing, that she had called them hoes and just other just not so nice things, and that she admitted she was jealous. They brought up one particular relationship, and that was with Carisha, aka Young Miami, where Jane was explaining that Young Miami bothered her because Diddy was so public with her. And we even think back to around that time frame, which it was pretty true. I thought that, honestly, Young Miami and Diddy were in a monogamous relationship together. They were always together. He had come onto her podcast, and then he took her to the Met Gala, and the two seemed like they were in a really loving relationship. But according to Jane, she was kind of in the shadows around this time period. And so she was saying that Diddy was so public with Young Miami, and it made it seem like the two, those being Young Miami and Diddy, were monogamous together. And she said, I didn't sign up to be in a relationship with someone who was public with someone else. And so she said that Diddy gave Carisha a Maybach, which is a very, very, very expensive car, and Jane said that she wanted something nice as well. And then the defense was kind of like, okay, well, you were jealous of Diddy and his other women, but Diddy was kind of jealous of you too. And the defense brought up Bear, and that's the man who Jane had met previously, but after she and Diddy had like an off period, Bear sent Jane $9,000, and that Diddy was pretty upset about it and was jealous about it. And so it seemed like, just like Cassie's testimony, there was jealousy aspects in their relationship. They brought up Gina also in Jane's testimony too. And so it seemed like there was kind of like a little trickle effect of just, the bottom line being that Diddy was seeing other women. Maybe when he was with Cassie, wasn't telling her that he was seeing other women, but he told Jane specifically he was seeing other women. And so it seemed like that was kind of a big point as far as Jane was concerned, as far as why was she having to go out and book the entertainers and do these hotel nights when he's over doing other things and social media with another woman that he was seeing. And on top of just Young Miami, there were other women that were listed too that Diddy was seeing all around the same time.
Prosecution could say, oh, this is an example of his manipulation. He was leading these women on to get what he wanted. The defense could say he's a cheater, right? Doesn't make him a sex trafficker. They also focused on Combs' drug use.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell if the defense was trying to excuse some of his behavior or offer, I wouldn't even say a defense, but they did put an emphasis on what he was going through, right, or seemingly going through. And that came up, by the way, during the whole 2016 Cassie purported beating, right? He was messed up, he was on drugs. In his apology video, he said that. Didn't they talk about his drug use today, too, under cross?
Yeah, and the drug use kind of was brought up at various different points during Jane's cross-examination today, but it did start this morning where Jane was saying that she knew that Diddy was consuming drugs, but didn't really, I guess, recognize or realize the quantity and the amount of drugs that he was consuming when the two initially got together. And Jane was saying, I could tell that he wasn't taking care of himself. I thought he had jaundice in his eyes, his gums were gray, his hands were shaky, and that Jane was the one who suggested that Diddy go to rehab. And then Tenney was like, okay, you felt at the beginning that he was a drug addict. And Jane said, well, I felt like he was overdoing the partying. And Jane says now in 2025, she does believe that Diddy is a drug addict. And then later on, they're kind of talking about that she found out later on that he was taking antidepressants, specifically Prozac and other medications, and that Diddy at one point mentioned to Jane about doing kind of a ketamine therapy treatment. And so then they kind of touched more into the drugs, where Jane says that she admits if there were drugs that she didn't like, she didn't particularly take them. And those specific drugs that she didn't really like were ketamine and cocaine, but she did like ecstasy, and she was totally fine taking MDMA or Molly, and she was fine to take the ecstasy because she says that she kind of wanted to do it in order to be more sexually kind of flirtatious with the other men during these hotel nights. And she said it got me out of my wine. I could focus on the sexual moment. And so I think as far as the drugs is concerned, it seemed like there are one point where they're kind of like, okay, well, did he use these drugs to be creative? He was in a better mood when he was on those drugs, specifically when he would take ecstasy, and he would do this while he was also making music, that it wasn't specifically only to hotel nights. But then there were other parts of the testimony where it seemed like they were kind of using the drugs to be like, okay, well, you see that Diddy has a problem too, right? And so it kind of went both ways as far as I think where the defense was going. And so depending on which juror it is, or depending on the group altogether, I feel like it could go either way on just what their thoughts are on as far as drug addiction, drug treatment, and whether or not these were taken recreationally or versus he had a problem. And so it really kind of was a little both that we were hearing about today.
Well, they want to avoid the prosecution's narrative, which the prosecution's narrative is he deliberately drugged women in order to take advantage of them and make them more compliant for freak-offs or hotel nights. So the more they can get away from that narrative that drugs were used nefariously for that purpose, I think that's what they're trying to do. Let's go to the racketeering. So the more you can talk about assistants or staff or bodyguards that helped facilitate these, if the jury accepts it, sex trafficking crime scenes, hotel nights, freak-offs, the more you can show his inner circle was committing crimes or covering them up, that's how you get to racketeering. That's how you get to a criminal enterprise. That's how you get to a criminal association. My understanding is Jane was asked a lot about Combs' assistants and what they knew about what was going on. And more specifically, she was asked about a very familiar name, somebody who I believe is going to have to take the stand. She's come up, I think, in every single person's testimony, Sean Combs' purported former chief of staff, Christina Coram. So what did Jane have to say today? What was she questioned about regarding Sean Combs' assistants, their knowledge about what was going on, and Christina Coram?
Well, I thought one thing that was interesting that was revealed during Jane's testimony is that Diddy didn't want these entertainers or these escorts, these other men that they were using during these debauchery nights, Wild King nights, hotel nights, over to his home. Why? Because there was a lot of staffers over there. He had a house manager, he had other assistants kind of running around. And so despite kind of what the government is alleging, where these assistants really helped set up these hotel rooms and these hotel nights specifically, that in some aspects that some of them may not have known that this was even going on. I think that's where the cross-examination was really kind of pointing to. But Christina Koram was brought up kind of a couple of times. And to your point, Jesse, I feel like there hasn't been a day where she's not brought up in some aspects. So I do kind of hope she testifies. It would be kind of weird, I feel like, if she didn't testify at this point. But the jurors were able to see some text exhibits. Unfortunately, I was just kind of hearing it as they were going and talking about this. But they saw a specific text exhibit between Jane and Christina Koram, where this is from April 9th of 2021, so kind of early-ish in their relationship, that being between Jane and Diddy. And Jane told Christina, hey, we got papped, and papped means paparazzi. And she texted Christina that I'm shaking because Jane didn't want everyone to know about their relationship at this point. She was worried that these photos would get out into the blogs and there might be other questions that come up after this. And so she's saying she didn't want her relationship to be public. And that for people to know that they were in a relationship. And Christina responded, well, I showed him those particular paparazzi photos. There are other people in this picture, so don't worry about it. And so Jane said that she was worried about her child's father finding out, but she was also worried about her friend finding out. And that was the friend that kind of introduced them really together, as far as when she had first started seeing Diddy, that she was actually over at his place with the friend that was actually seeing him, and she didn't want this friend to know that Diddy and her were in a relationship. And so then there were other times where Christina Koram was brought up, and so that was when we heard about these text exhibits, specifically between Jane and Christina Koram from December 2nd of 2021. And I think this is where the part gets a little dicey as far as possibly count one goes, where they're discussing flight options and how Jane was flying a package with, or had a package with her, and that was, drugs that she had packed into her checked baggage to give to Diddy because Diddy was asking her to do it, and how Christina Koram was like, okay, I've done this before. But I think the defense was kind of like, well, why did you ask KK if this was right or wrong? Because flying with a lot of drugs, obviously we know, is a federal crime. And so Jane is like, well, because Sean told me to pick this up. Sean told me to pick up this package for him. And Jane was saying that she wasn't particularly even close to Christina, that Christina didn't really like her. And the defense points out, okay, well, why would Christina hide drugs in her luggage if she was always one to be flying on Diddy's private plane? Because, again, Diddy's a very rich man. He flies private. So why would she have to check packages of drugs into a checked bag when she's going on a private jet in the first place? And so then Jane is explaining that Christina Koram had very strong opinions about her, and she felt like that was part of the reason why Diddy kind of felt some ways about Jane during specific aspects of their relationship.